Have you ever watched someone completely fall apart under pressure while someone else, facing the exact same circumstances, remains perfectly composed, making strategic decisions that ultimately lead them to victory? What separates these two types of people, and which one are you? Imagine standing at the edge of a metaphorical cliff. Below you lies a chaotic scene, people drowning in their emotions, reacting impulsively to every challenge life throws their way. Above, there's a realm of clarity where decisions aren't clouded by emotional turbulence. This stark contrast represents the fundamental choice we all face daily. Will we be controlled by our emotions, or will we control them? Has this ever happened to you? A moment where your emotional reaction to a situation only made things worse, leaving you wondering what might have been if you'd maintained your composure. The brilliant political philosopher Machiavelli observed this pattern centuries ago. While studying the rise and fall of powerful figures throughout history, he noticed something remarkable. Kingdoms and empires rarely collapsed due to external threats alone. Instead, their downfall often came from within, from leaders who felt too deeply and thought too little. These rulers allowed their emotions to dictate their actions, making them predictable, manipulable, and ultimately vulnerable. What if I told you that mastering your emotional responses isn't just about personal growth? It's about survival in a world that rewards the composed and punishes the reactive. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely transform how you navigate life's challenges. Machiavelli's cold code isn't about becoming heartless or suppressing your humanity. Rather, it's about developing an unshakable core that allows you to experience emotions without being controlled by them. Think of it as emotional intelligence taken to its highest form, the ability to remain sharp and focused when everyone around you is losing their heads. The coldest person in the room isn't necessarily the cruelest. They're often the most powerful because they can see opportunities others miss in their emotional blindness. They can make decisions based on reality rather than reaction. They can identify when others are attempting to manipulate them through emotional triggers. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. What makes this philosophy so challenging, yet so valuable, is that it goes against our natural instincts. We're biologically wired to react emotionally to threats, opportunities, and social dynamics. But what separated Machiavelli's thinking from others was his recognition that this natural tendency is precisely what makes most people predictable and therefore vulnerable to those who have mastered themselves. The question now becomes, can you train yourself to stand firm when others crumble? Can you develop the mental discipline to if you want to master the art of emotional control and strategic thinking, hit subscribe now. Join thousands of others discovering how to become unbreakable in a world of chaos. Can you train yourself to stand firm when others crumble? Can you develop the mental discipline to recognize the hidden truth that most people miss? Your emotions, while deeply personal, are far more dangerous than you might realize. They're weapons that can be turned against you with frightening precision. Think about it. When someone knows what triggers your anger, fear, or pride, they essentially hold a remote control to your behavior. A skilled manipulator needs only to press the right emotional buttons and suddenly you're acting exactly as they predicted, often against your own interests. This psychological vulnerability creates a decisive advantage for those who remain composed while deliberately destabilizing others. The journey toward emotional mastery begins with a sobering revelation that many find difficult to accept. The world is fundamentally indifferent to your emotional state. This isn't meant to sound harsh, but rather to illuminate a critical mindset shift. Nature, markets, competitors, and even time itself operate according to their own laws, completely unmoved by how we feel about them. The universe will continue testing your limits, presenting challenges, and creating obstacles regardless of whether you're emotionally prepared. This indifference represents both a threat and an opportunity. Those who expect the world to accommodate their feelings find themselves constantly disappointed, perpetually reactive, and ultimately ineffective. But those who align their decisions with reality rather than emotional comfort discover a profound source of power, the ability to see situations clearly while others are blinded by their feelings. The most transformative insight in this entire philosophy is that your greatest enemy isn't the competitor across the table, the critic undermining your work, or even the friend who betrayed you. Your most dangerous adversary resides within. It's the emotional fog that descends whenever your feelings take control of your perception. This internal saboteur distorts reality in predictable ways. Anger magnifies threats, fear multiplies risks, and hope diminishes obvious dangers. Consider how this plays out in your daily life. When you're angry, you miss crucial details that would otherwise be obvious. When you're afraid, you see threats that don't actually exist. When you're overly optimistic, you might ignore clear warning signs that spell disaster. In each case, the temperature of your emotions directly correlates with the cloudiness of your judgment. The impact of this emotional fog extends far beyond momentary discomfort. It fundamentally alters the trajectory of your decisions, relationships, and ultimately your life. Behind the scenes of every major regret is often an emotion-driven decision made without the benefit of clear thinking. The most painful failures typically aren't caused by lack of information, but by lack of emotional discipline at critical moments. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining the practical applications of emotional mastery and how the relationship between temperature and clarity becomes the foundation for effective decision-making in every area of life. The transformation begins when you recognize that controlling your emotional temperature isn't just a philosophical concept. It's a practical skill that creates immediate advantages. Drop in the comments. I'm mastering my emotional temperature if you've ever experienced that moment of clarity that comes after an emotional storm has passed, and you suddenly see everything you missed while in the heat of the moment. The relationship between emotional temperature and mental clarity operates like a thermostat for your decision-making. Think about it as a direct inverse correlation. When your emotional temperature rises, your clarity of thought drops in almost perfect proportion. This insight unlocks a revolutionary approach to navigating life's challenges. Consider your most recent heated argument. In the moment, your perspective seemed absolutely justified, your reasoning sound, your position unassailable. But hours later, after cooling down, you likely experienced that familiar revelation where suddenly you could see aspects of the situation that were completely invisible to you earlier. That's not coincidence. It's the temperature-clarity relationship at work. Our culture has crafted a compelling narrative about passion that deserves careful examination. We're told that intense emotion fuels greatness, that the most passionate people achieve the most remarkable outcomes. There's certainly some truth here, but it conceals a dangerous misconception. The authentic breakthrough happens when we distinguish between passion as a driving force versus passion as an unchecked commander of our behavior. The most impressive achievements throughout history came not from people who were simply passionate, but from those who channeled their passion through the filter of disciplined thinking. Their strategy wasn't to eliminate emotional energy, but to harness it within boundaries they consciously established. This balanced approach represents the true architecture of accomplishment, not the unconstrained emotional explosions we often romanticize. Here's where the paradigm shift occurs. The disciplined mind doesn't reject emotions. It simply refuses to let feelings define reality. This separation, the ability to say, "I feel this strongly, but I recognize that my feeling doesn't necessarily reflect what's objectively happening," creates the foundation for wisdom. It's the difference between reacting to the world as you wish it to be versus responding to the world as it actually is. The transformation begins with a simple but profound practice, pausing between emotional stimulus and response. In that pause lies your freedom, the space to acknowledge what you're feeling without automatically assuming it represents truth. This practice develops an inner observatory where you can witness your emotions without being consumed by them. Consider how often we mistake emotional reactions for accurate assessments of people and situations. Someone criticizes your work, and suddenly they become the enemy. Someone praises you, and immediately they're trustworthy. Neither conclusion necessarily reflects reality. Both are merely temperature readings from a heated mind, responding to stimuli without verification. The wisdom journey involves learning to ask better questions when emotions arise. Instead of, "How does this make me feel?" which merely confirms your current emotional state, ask, "What might this actually mean?" This subtle shift moves you from reactive interpretation to conscious exploration, opening doorways to insights that remain closed to those trapped in emotional reactions. The strategic advantage of emotional discipline becomes particularly evident in high-stakes environments where others are making decisions based on how they feel rather than what the evidence suggests. While they're responding to emotional mirages, you're engaging with actual conditions, an asymmetric advantage that compounds over time. Now, let me introduce you to the practical framework for implementing this separation between feelings and truth in your daily interactions, especially when faced with provocations designed to throw you off balance. The techniques we'll explore work across personal relationships, professional environments, and even in managing your relationship with yourself. Drop in the comments, "I choose clarity over heat," if you've recognized how your best decisions came from moments when you maintained emotional discipline rather than surrendering to reactive impulses. The practical framework begins with recognizing a fundamental error most of us make daily, mistaking our emotional reactions for objective reality. This confusion operates below our conscious awareness, but dramatically influences our decisions. Consider how quickly we label someone evil after they've disrespected us, or how readily we trust someone who's praised us. Neither conclusion necessarily reflects reality, yet we act as if these emotional assessments are undeniable facts. This pattern creates vulnerability at every level of your life. In business, emotional decision-making can lead you to invest in people who flatter you rather than those who will actually deliver results. In relationships, it might cause you to dismiss valuable connections because of minor friction, or cling to harmful ones because they occasionally make you feel good. The revelation here isn't that emotions are wrong. It's that they're incomplete signals requiring verification rather than immediate trust. Machiavelli observed this distinction centuries ago when he noted that the wise person sees reality clearly from the start because their mind remains cold and analytical. Their advantage isn't intelligence in the traditional sense, but emotional discipline that preserves mental clarity. Meanwhile, the fool only gains this same clarity after damage is done, after the consequences have materialized and emotions have finally settled. Think about your own experience. How many times have you looked back at a situation and thought, "I can't believe I couldn't see this coming"? The truth is, you probably could have seen it if your perception hadn't been clouded by emotional involvement. The pathway to wisdom isn't accumulating more information. It's developing the capacity to see the information you already have without distortion. One of the most powerful metaphors for understanding this discipline comes from nature itself. A disciplined mind resembles a sheet of ice, clear, solid, and reflective of truth, rather than warped by emotional heat. Just as ice provides a perfect reflective surface when undisturbed by heat, your mind offers the clearest perspective when it isn't disturbed by emotional reactivity. This ice sheet analogy illuminates the profound difference between simply suppressing emotions and actually mastering them. Suppression creates brittle ice that eventually cracks under pressure. True mastery creates strong, clear ice that can withstand challenges while maintaining its reflective properties. This clarity becomes your ultimate defense against both external manipulation and internal self-deception. Behind the scenes of every significant achievement lies this same pattern: people who maintained cold minds when everyone else was burning up with emotion. They weren't emotionless. They were emotionally disciplined. They felt deeply but refused to let those feelings dictate their perception or decisions. This distinction marks the boundary between those who occasionally succeed and those who consistently prevail regardless of circumstances. The journey toward this discipline isn't merely philosophical, it's intensely practical and immediately applicable to your everyday challenges. By developing what I call emotional temperature awareness, you begin noticing the subtle signs of heating up: quickened speech, physical tension, defensive posturing. These early warning systems allow you to implement cooling techniques before clarity diminishes. Let me walk you through the specific strategies that transform this conceptual understanding into a lived experience, particularly focusing on how to maintain your ice sheet integrity when facing deliberate attempts to raise your emotional temperature and cloud your judgment. Type "ice clear mind" in the comments if you've noticed how your best insights often come during moments of emotional calm rather than during periods of intense feeling. The strategies begin with understanding a critical distinction that separates masters of self-control from everyone else. Action without intention is like throwing punches in the dark. Consider how often people move through life responding to whatever emotion happens to be strongest in the moment. They're angry, so they lash out. They're excited, so they overcommit. They're afraid, so they retreat. This reactive pattern creates movement without direction, burning valuable energy while achieving little of lasting significance. The revelation here transforms how you approach every interaction. Emotional reaction without strategic intention is essentially surrendering your power to circumstance. When you move purely from feeling, you're not actually directing your life. You're simply responding to whatever stimulus happens to trigger you most strongly in any given moment. This is the catalyst for regrettable decisions, damaged relationships, and missed opportunities. But there's an even more insidious consequence to emotional reactivity that operates beneath the surface: the predictability problem. When you consistently react from emotion, you become transparent and remarkably easy to manipulate. Others quickly learn your triggers and can anticipate your moves with unsettling accuracy. Think about it. Have you ever dealt with someone whose buttons you could push with almost mathematical precision? That person has surrendered their strategic advantage through emotional predictability. This transparency isn't merely inconvenient, it's potentially devastating in any competitive environment. Whether in negotiations, professional advancement, or even personal relationships, the person who can be emotionally manipulated is fundamentally disadvantaged. Meanwhile, the individual who maintains emotional discipline preserves their mystery. They remain unreadable and therefore significantly more powerful in every interaction. The paradigm shift occurs when you begin asking a different primary question. Instead of "how do I feel about this?", which merely confirms your current emotional state, You consistently ask, "What am I trying to achieve here?" This pivotal reframing transforms your decision architecture from reactive to intentional. It elevates every choice from impulsive to strategic. The blueprint for implementing this shift involves creating what I call purpose filters, predetermined criteria through which you process situations before responding. These filters might include questions like, does this action move me toward my actual goal? Is this response strategic or merely satisfying in the moment? Will I still believe this was the right move when I'm emotionally calm? These filters don't eliminate emotion. They simply prevent emotion from hijacking your decision-making process. Subscribe now to access more powerful insights on mastering your mind and emotions. Don't miss our next video on applying these Machiavellian principles to transform your life. The transformation that follows this shift is remarkable. You begin noticing how others remain trapped in predictable emotional loops while you maintain strategic flexibility. You recognize manipulation attempts that previously would have triggered immediate reaction. You preserve energy that once dissipated through emotional leakage, channeling it instead toward deliberate outcomes that actually matter. Let me illuminate the specific tactical applications of purpose-driven action in environments specifically designed to provoke emotional reactions. From high-pressure negotiations to personal confrontations where others are actively attempting to destabilize your emotional equilibrium. Drop purpose over feeling in the comments if you've experienced how much clearer your thinking becomes when you focus on what you're trying to achieve, rather than how a situation makes you feel in the moment. The tactical applications become particularly evident when examining what I call the provocation test. Those moments when someone deliberately attempts to trigger an emotional reaction from you. Think about the last time someone insulted you, challenged you, or attempted to make you look foolish. What was your immediate response? If you reacted quickly and defensively, you gave them exactly what they wanted, control over your behavior. This revelation transforms your entire approach to provocations. The immediate reaction is almost always what the provocateur desires. They're counting on your predictable emotional response because it serves their agenda, not yours. By instantly defending, explaining, or counterattacking, you've surrendered the strategic high ground and entered their territory on their terms. The hidden truth lies in understanding that the most powerful response to provocation is often no immediate response at all. By pausing, even briefly, you create space for deliberate choice rather than automatic reaction. This pause isn't passive, it's intensely active. Behind the apparent stillness, you're evaluating options, considering actual objectives, and selecting a response that serves your purpose rather than satisfying their expectation. This approach requires something increasingly rare in our instant gratification culture: genuine patience. Intentional action demands the ability to sit with discomfort, to feel emotions without immediately acting on them. This patience creates a remarkable transformation in your interactions. You become unpredictable in the best possible way. While others can anticipate reactive behaviors, they cannot easily predict responses flowing from calm deliberation. The journey toward this patience begins with recognizing that emotional discomfort is rarely an emergency. Most situations that trigger strong feelings don't actually require immediate response. This realization creates breathing room, the mental space, to absorb the initial emotional impact before deciding how or whether to respond. The decision architecture shifts from react now to respond when strategically advantageous. Machiavelli captured this distinction perfectly when he observed, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." While this might initially sound manipulative, the deeper insight is profound. Force, emotional reaction, necessarily reveals your hand, while strategic intention works quietly and effectively without announcing itself. The person who reacts with visible emotion exposes their position, priorities, and vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, the person who responds with deliberate calm preserves their mystery and maintains their advantage. Consider this principle in practice. When someone attempts to provoke you in a meeting or social gathering, reacting forcefully might feel satisfying in the moment, but it broadcasts your triggers and weaknesses to everyone present. Responding with measured intention, perhaps even silence, creates an entirely different impact. It communicates strength without struggle and power without desperation. The mindset shift involves recognizing that many provocations are essentially invitations to surrender your power. When you decline that invitation by maintaining emotional discipline, you retain control not just of yourself, but of the entire interaction. This isn't about suppressing authentic response. It's about choosing the timing, nature, and purpose of that response, rather than having it dictated by someone else's agenda. Let me expand on this principle by exploring the critical distinction between immediate gratification and strategic patience, particularly focusing on how emotional self-discipline creates unprecedented leverage in both personal and professional domains. Share "patience is power" in the comments if you've experienced how delaying your response to provocation has given you an advantage that wouldn't have been possible with an immediate reaction. The distinction between strategic patience and emotional reaction becomes even more critical when we examine what happens in direct conflicts or negotiations. There exists what I call the first mover disadvantage, a counterintuitive reality where the person who reacts first typically reveals their vulnerability first. Think about this carefully. When you immediately respond to a challenge, criticism, or offer, you're essentially providing a detailed map of your sensitivities, priorities, and boundaries that others can exploit. This revelation transforms how you approach high-stakes interactions. The person across the table who immediately jumps to defend their position, clarify their statement, or counter your proposal has just shown you exactly what matters to them. They've revealed their pressure points while you've maintained your mystery. This asymmetry of information creates an immediate leverage imbalance. They know what triggers you, but you remain unreadable. The mindset shift involves recognizing that true power often manifests as patience and stillness rather than immediate action. Consider the fundamental difference in perception between someone who responds instantly versus someone who takes their time. The quick responder appears needy, perhaps even desperate for resolution. Meanwhile, the patient individual communicates something profound through their composure. They don't need anything from you immediately. This perceived independence creates gravitational pull in any negotiation or conflict. Behind the scenes of nearly every significant power dynamic, you'll find this pattern. The person who can afford to wait often secures better terms than the person rushing toward resolution. This isn't manipulation. It's simply the natural outcome of patience intersecting with human psychology. When you demonstrate that you can sit comfortably in uncertainty while the other person grows increasingly uncomfortable, the entire dynamic transforms in your favor. Perhaps the most powerful application of this principle emerges in what I call the strategic use of silence. When verbally attacked or challenged, most people immediately launch into defense mode, explaining themselves, justifying their position, or counter-attacking. What they don't realize is that silence can be infinitely more powerful than any verbal defense. Silence creates a void that the aggressor feels compelled to fill, often revealing far more about themselves than they intended. The transformation occurs when you recognize that silence isn't passive, it's intensely active. Behind that apparent stillness, you're observing, gathering information, and maintaining complete freedom of response, while the other person continues revealing their hand. Your silence forces them to keep talking, to elaborate, to over-explain, all while you maintain perfect composure and strategic advantage. This approach requires a fundamental shift in how you view conversations. Rather than seeing silence as awkward or weak, you begin recognizing it as a powerful space where others often reveal their true intentions, priorities, and weaknesses. You're not simply avoiding response, you're strategically creating conditions where the other person tells you everything you need to know while learning nothing about your actual position. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how this principle of strategic silence extends beyond individual interactions into broader leadership contexts, particularly focusing on how emotional self-discipline transforms not just how others perceive you, but how you perceive yourself in challenging situations. Right, silence is strategy. In the comments, if you've experienced the power of saying nothing when others expected you to immediately defend or explain yourself. In leadership contexts, this principle of strategic silence transforms into something even more powerful, responding on your terms rather than reacting on theirs. The revelation that changes everything is understanding that effective response comes not from immediate reaction, but from calculated timing. When you control when you respond, not just how, you fundamentally alter the power dynamic of any interaction. Consider the difference between these two scenarios. In the first, someone challenges you publicly and you immediately leap to defend yourself. In the second, you acknowledge their point with minimal response, then circle back hours or even days later with a measured strategic response when they least expect it. The first scenario places you in a defensive position, fighting uphill. The second transforms what began as defense into disguised offense. You're now operating from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. This approach creates a profound psychological impact. When you respond on your timeline rather than reacting to their provocation, you communicate something essential. You are not controlled by their actions. This independence signals power in a way that even the most articulate immediate defense cannot. You've shifted from reacting to their script to writing your own, a transformation that fundamentally changes how others perceive and interact with you. Machiavelli captured this sophisticated balance in his famous metaphor advising leaders to be both fox and lion. The fox represents patient observation, strategic thinking, and careful timing, the ability to recognize traps before stepping into them. The lion represents decisive strength when the moment requires it. Most people demonstrate only one of these qualities, either constant reaction without strategy, all lion, or endless analysis without action, all fox. The mastery comes in embodying both, knowing when to observe and when to act. The journey toward this mastery involves developing what I call strategic patience, the ability to deliberately delay response until the moment of maximum advantage. This isn't procrastination or avoidance, it's calculated restraint. You're fully prepared to respond, but you choose your moment based on strategy rather than emotional impulse or external pressure. This patience creates a foundation for influence that reactive individuals simply cannot access. Beyond these strategic considerations lies an even more fundamental reality. Your voice betrays your internal state with remarkable precision. Your tone, breath pattern, and physical mannerisms reveal what's happening inside you, regardless of the words you choose. This creates a critical insight. If your body language contradicts your words, people will instinctively trust the nonverbal signals every time. This revelation transforms how you approach high-stakes communications. When your heart is racing, your voice rising, and your breathing shallow, no amount of confident language can mask the underlying emotional turbulence. Others might not consciously identify these signals, but they register them subconsciously, creating an immediate credibility gap between what you're saying and how you're saying it. The practical application begins with something deceptively simple: conscious breathing. By controlling your breath, you directly influence your heart rate, which in turn affects your vocal tone and physical composure. This creates congruence between your words and your presence, a harmony that dramatically enhances your impact and believability in every interaction. Let me illuminate how this conscious control of nonverbal signals extends beyond mere communication into actual negotiation leverage, particularly focusing on how mastering your physical presence creates immediate authority even before you've spoken. A single word. Type voice control in the comments if you've noticed how your tone changes when you're emotionally triggered versus when you're operating from a place of calm, strategic thinking. The mastery of negotiation leverage begins with understanding a fundamental truth that most people miss entirely: how something is said often matters more than what is said. This reality transforms your approach to every significant conversation. Your tone creates the critical difference between commanding respect and merely begging for it. A compliment delivered with steady eyes becomes a subtle warning. A challenge issued with measured cadence becomes an opportunity rather than a threat. Think about the last presentation or crucial conversation you witnessed. Who commanded the room? It wasn't necessarily the person with the highest title or the most comprehensive information. It was the individual whose tone communicated unwavering confidence, not through volume or intensity, but through controlled precision. This authority emerges not from forced dominance, but from inner composure that manifests externally. The revelation that changes everything is understanding that tone isn't just a stylistic choice. It's a direct window into your internal state. A shaking voice reveals doubt regardless of confident words. A rising pitch signals stress despite assertive language. These subtle cues are processed by listeners at an almost primal level, creating immediate judgments about your credibility and authority that override the actual content of your message. This transformation begins with something surprisingly physical: the heart rate connection. Physical composure starts not with outward appearance, but with controlling your internal rhythms. When your pulse rises in response to challenge or pressure, a cascade of physiological changes follows. Your breathing becomes shallow, blood flows away from your prefrontal cortex, and your thinking narrows dramatically. What was strategic thinking becomes reactive survival mode, a state where wisdom is neurologically impossible. The practical application involves developing what performance psychologists call arousal control, the ability to deliberately lower your physiological response to stressors. Simple techniques like box breathing, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, holding for 4, create immediate physiological downregulation. This isn't merely a relaxation technique. It's strategic preparation for maintaining clear thinking when clarity matters most. Perhaps the most powerful manifestation of this composure appears in what I call the time zone shift. By deliberately slowing your responses when others speed up, you create the remarkable impression of operating in an entirely different time zone, one unaffected by the urgency that consumes everyone around you. This controlled tempo communicates something profound without explicit statement. You remain unruffled by the pressures that are visibly affecting others. Consider how this plays out in high-pressure scenarios. When deadlines loom, when stakes rise, when tension mounts, most people unconsciously accelerate, speaking faster, thinking less thoroughly, making reactive decisions. By consciously doing the opposite, slowing your speech, extending your pauses, maintaining measured movements, you create immediate distinction. You become the calm center that others instinctively gravitate toward and follow. The journey toward this composure isn't about suppressing natural responses, but about developing a higher gear of self-awareness that allows you to observe your own physiological state and adjust it deliberately. This creates a remarkable feedback loop. As you control your physiology, your thinking clarifies. As your thinking clarifies, your external presence becomes more commanding. As your presence strengthens, others respond differently to you. Let me reveal the specific techniques that transform this understanding into practical advantage, particularly focusing on how maintaining physiological control creates decision-making clarity that becomes your ultimate competitive advantage in any high-stakes situation. Drop controlled tempo in the comments if you've noticed how slowing down your responses actually increases your influence rather than diminishing it. The practical techniques for maintaining physiological control begin with understanding a profound insight that Machiavelli articulated centuries ago. People judge more by what they see than by what actually is. This observation transforms your entire approach to difficult situations. Managing your visible composure isn't superficial image management. It's strategic influence at its most fundamental level. How you appear while facing challenges often matters more than your actual capabilities or preparation. Think about leaders you've respected during crisis situations. What distinguished them wasn't necessarily having all the answers or feeling no anxiety. Their distinction came from their visible composure, the ability to project calm confidence even when experiencing internal uncertainty. This outward stability creates a ripple effect, influencing how others perceive not just you, but the entire situation you're facing together. The transformation begins with recognizing a fundamental truth that changes everything. Pain is inevitable, but panic is optional. This distinction separates those who merely survive challenges from those who transform them into advantage. Pain, whether emotional, physical, mental, or professional, will find you regardless of preparation or position. No amount of success, wealth, or skill grants immunity from life's difficulties, but your response to that inevitable pain remains entirely within your control. Consider the critical difference between pain and panic. Pain is the signal that something difficult is happening. Panic is the unproductive amplification of that signal until it drowns out clear thinking. The person experiencing pain can still make strategic decisions. The person in panic has surrendered their decision-making capacity entirely to their limbic system, the primitive part of the brain incapable of nuance or foresight. This insight reveals perhaps the most dangerous aspect of panic, the multiplication effect. When panic takes hold, it doesn't merely cloud your thinking. It actively multiplies your problems through a cascade of poor decisions. A challenge that might have been manageable becomes catastrophic, not because of its inherent difficulty, but because panic triggered desperate, often self-destructive actions. Think about your own experience. How many difficult situations became genuinely disastrous only after panic led to impulsive decisions? The revelation that changes everything is understanding that emotional composure isn't just about appearing strong, it's about preserving your actual decision-making capacity when it matters most. By training yourself to experience pain without escalating to panic, you maintain access to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain capable of strategic thinking, creative problem-solving, and proportional response. This distinction explains why certain individuals seem to thrive under pressure that crushes others. It's not that they don't feel the weight of challenges or the sting of setbacks. The difference lies in their disciplined refusal to allow those feelings to hijack their thinking process. They've developed what resilience researchers call emotional grit, the capacity to function effectively while experiencing discomfort rather than being disabled by it. The journey toward this capability involves developing what I call discomfort tolerance. systematically expanding your capacity to sit with uncomfortable feelings without immediately seeking escape. This creates a foundation for clarity that remains accessible even in circumstances where others have surrendered to emotional flooding. Let me explore how this capacity for experiencing pain without panic transforms not just your decision-making, but your entire presence in challenging environments, particularly focusing on how emotional discipline creates leadership gravity that pulls others into your orbit during times of uncertainty. Comment: pain without panic. If you've experienced the powerful clarity that comes from acknowledging difficulty without allowing it to escalate into unproductive emotional flooding, the emotional discipline that creates leadership gravity begins with understanding endurance as a form of mental armor. True strength isn't demonstrated by avoiding difficult situations, but by developing the capacity to acknowledge pain without letting it dictate your behavior. This creates a psychological resilience that others find both impressive and instinctively trustworthy. When everyone else is visibly struggling with pressure, the person who accepts discomfort without being defined by it naturally emerges as a focal point of stability. This isn't about projecting false stoicism or suppressing authentic response. It's about developing the internal architecture that allows you to experience difficulty without being consumed by it. Think about individuals who faced genuine adversity, serious illness, financial collapse, profound loss, and emerged not broken, but strengthened. The transformation wasn't magical, it was methodical. They developed a relationship with discomfort that fundamentally changed how challenges affected them. Machiavelli captured this mindset shift in a profound observation that still resonates centuries later. Where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great. This insight reveals a counterintuitive truth about human capacity. Your determination often defines what you can endure more than objective circumstances. Two people can face identical challenges, yet experience entirely different levels of suffering based primarily on their relationship with discomfort. The revelation here transforms how you approach every significant challenge. Your willingness to endure often matters more than the difficulty itself. The person who decides beforehand that they will persist regardless of discomfort has already overcome the most significant obstacle. This isn't blind optimism. It's strategic commitment that creates psychological momentum before the challenge even begins. Behind the scenes of this commitment lies a fundamental reframing that changes everything. For those who have mastered themselves, pain becomes merely information rather than a command to stop. Think about elite athletes, accomplished entrepreneurs, or anyone who's achieved mastery in demanding domains. They haven't eliminated pain from their experience. They've revolutionized their relationship with it. Pain becomes diagnostic data rather than an emergency requiring immediate escape. This perspective allows continued function through difficulty that would paralyze those with less developed mental discipline. Consider how this plays out in practical scenarios. While others are frantically searching for escape from discomfort, you're gathering valuable information about the situation, maintaining strategic clarity, and identifying opportunities hidden within the challenge itself. This creates an asymmetric advantage that compounds over time. The journey toward this relationship with pain begins with deliberate exposure to manageable discomfort, what psychologists call stress inoculation. By systematically encountering difficult situations in controlled contexts, you essentially recalibrate your threat response system. Activities that trigger minor discomfort, cold showers, fasting, difficult conversations, public speaking, become training grounds for emotional self-regulation. Each exposure builds neural pathways that remain accessible during genuine crisis. This practice creates what resilience researchers call stress signature awareness, the ability to recognize your personal patterns of response to pressure. Do you become verbally aggressive, withdraw, seek immediate distraction? Simply becoming conscious of these patterns creates space for choice rather than automatic reaction. This awareness doesn't eliminate the discomfort of challenging situations, but it prevents that discomfort from hijacking your executive function. Let me expand on how this elevated relationship with discomfort transforms not just individual resilience, but also team dynamics and leadership influence, particularly focusing on how emotional discipline during crisis creates disproportionate impact on organizational culture and performance. Write discomfort as data in the comments if you've noticed how changing your relationship with pain, seeing it as information rather than emergency, has allowed you to maintain clarity in situations where others lose perspective. The elevated relationship with discomfort transforms not just individual resilience, but creates ripple effects throughout entire organizations through a practical approach I call the one more step philosophy. Rather than overwhelming yourself by focusing on the entirety of a painful journey, endurance builds through simple incrementalism, taking just one more step, then one more after that. This approach transforms seemingly impossible challenges into manageable segments that even the most disciplined individuals can navigate. Consider how this philosophy applies to any difficult endeavor, whether physical challenges, professional obstacles, or personal transformation. When viewed in their entirety, these journeys often appear insurmountable, but when broken down to the essential question, can I take just one more step? The calculus changes entirely. The answer to this question is almost always yes, even in circumstances where completing the entire journey seems impossible. This mental framework creates momentum that carries you through difficulty that would stop others entirely. This incremental approach to endurance creates something remarkable in organizational contexts: the value of calm during crisis. When pressure mounts, deadlines compress, and stakes escalate, most people visibly deteriorate. Their composure crumbles, their thinking narrows, and their behavior becomes increasingly erratic. In these moments, simply maintaining composed presence creates immediate, tangible value. Your calmness amid chaos establishes leadership without requiring formal authority or elaborate credentials. Think about crisis situations you've witnessed firsthand. Who naturally emerged as the focal point? It wasn't necessarily the most technically skilled or officially designated leader. It was invariably the person who maintained clear thinking and steady presence while everyone else descended into emotional reactivity. This calm authority creates what psychologists call attentional contagion. Others instinctively orient toward whoever demonstrates the most composed presence during uncertainty. The revelation that transforms how you approach every high-pressure scenario is understanding that becoming the eye of the storm provides unmatched strategic advantage. When you position yourself as the still center while chaos swirls around you, you create asymmetric leverage, clear thinking, amid confusion, and the ability to act decisively while others remain paralyzed by emotional flooding. This isn't merely about personal composure. It's about strategic positioning that creates disproportionate influence. Behind the scenes of this positioning lies a paradoxical truth. The person who appears least affected by crisis often exerts the most influence over its resolution. Not because they feel nothing, they may experience the same internal pressure as everyone else, but because they've developed the capacity to function effectively despite that pressure. This creates a presence that others naturally gravitate toward and follow, particularly when circumstances feel most uncertain. The journey toward becoming this stabilizing presence begins with recognizing that calmness during chaos isn't an innate personality trait, but a disciplined practice. By deliberately exposing yourself to increasingly challenging situations while maintaining emotional discipline, you systematically expand your capacity to function under pressure. Each successful navigation recalibrates your baseline, making previously overwhelming circumstances manageable. This practice creates what leadership researchers call pressure immunity. Not an absence of feeling pressure, but an increased threshold for what level of pressure triggers dysfunction. The same situation that causes others to lose composure barely registers as challenging for someone who's systematically built their pressure tolerance through deliberate exposure and disciplined response. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how this emotional discipline transforms not just crisis response, but proactive opportunity creation. How becoming unshakable allows you to identify and capitalize on possibilities that remain invisible to those consumed by reactive emotion. Share calm amid chaos in the comments if you've experienced how maintaining composure during difficult situations has allowed you to see opportunities and solutions that others miss entirely. The proactive opportunity creation emerges from understanding the hidden opportunity within chaos itself. Crisis situations create a powerful revelation that most people miss entirely. They distinguish between those who are genuinely strong and those merely pretending to be. When pressure mounts, masks slip, and true character emerges. This revelation creates asymmetric opportunities for those who maintain composure while others crumble. Consider how this plays out in professional environments. When markets collapse, when deadlines compress, when unexpected challenges emerge, most people immediately focus on minimizing damage. They enter pure survival mode. Meanwhile, those with emotional discipline see the same circumstances as potential advantage. A chance to advance while competitors retreat, to solve problems others can't handle, to demonstrate value when it matters most. The objective circumstances haven't changed, only the perception has shifted. This perspective shift creates what I call opportunity asymmetry, the ability to identify possibilities that remain completely invisible to those consumed by emotional reactivity. While others see only threat, you perceive both the challenge and the hidden opportunities embedded within it. This dual vision creates a strategic advantage that compounds over time, particularly in competitive environments where emotional discipline remains rare. The foundation for this advanced perception begins with a fundamental reframing of emotions themselves. The final principle that transforms everything is understanding that emotions aren't friends or enemies. They're tools that either serve you or control you, depending on your level of mastery. This insight revolutionizes your relationship with your emotional experience, shifting from subjugation to strategic utilization. Think about how most people relate to their emotions. They either suppress them entirely, creating internal pressure that eventually explodes, or surrender to them completely, becoming reactive and unpredictable. Both approaches create vulnerability. The mastery lies in a more sophisticated relationship, acknowledging emotions as valuable signals while maintaining executive control over your response to those signals. The transformation occurs at what psychologists call the decision point, that critical gap between feeling and action. Emotional mastery exists precisely in this space, the pause where you consciously decide whether to follow an emotion or override it with more strategic behavior. Most people never develop this gap. Their emotions and actions remain fused together in automatic patterns. The disciplined individual systematically expands this space, creating room for choice where others experience only compulsion. The journey toward this mastery begins with honest self-examination. By reviewing past mistakes and failures, a revealing pattern usually emerges showing how emotional reactivity led to poor outcomes across different contexts. You notice the same emotional triggers, creating similar problematic responses, despite completely different circumstances. This recognition becomes the catalyst for breaking the pattern through deliberate emotional discipline. The blueprint for this transformation involves developing what psychologists call pattern interruption, the ability to recognize your automatic emotional sequences before they fully activate and consciously redirect them toward more productive responses. This isn't about suppressing authentic feeling, it's about preventing those feelings from hijacking your strategic thinking and decision-making capacity. Let me explore the specific psychological framework that transforms this conceptual understanding into practical mastery, particularly focusing on how developing emotional discipline in everyday situations creates the foundation for exceptional performance during moments that truly matter. Comment "mastering the gap" in the comments if you've experienced that critical moment of choice between feeling an emotion and deciding whether to act on it, the space where true power resides. As we bring this journey to a close, I want you to remember something crucial. Emotional mastery isn't about becoming cold or detached from life. It's about developing the capacity to feel deeply while thinking clearly, a combination that creates extraordinary power in every area of your life. The principles we've explored today, from maintaining a cold mind to acting with intention, from embracing pain without panic to becoming the eye of the storm, these aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that transform how you navigate challenges, opportunities, and relationships. Tools that Machiavelli understood centuries ago, but that remain just as relevant in our modern world of constant stimulation and emotional triggers. If this perspective has resonated with you, if you've recognized patterns in your own life where emotional reactivity has created unnecessary suffering, then you're already ahead of most people. You've seen behind the curtain to a deeper truth about human behavior and performance. I'd love to continue this conversation with you. Subscribe to join our community of people committed to mastering themselves rather than being mastered by circumstance. If this message found you at exactly the right moment, drop stone-cold clarity in the comments. I read them all and would love to hear which principle resonated with you most. If you found value in what we've discussed today, a like lets me know this content matters to you and helps others discover these same insights. Your engagement quite literally shapes what we create next. Speaking of what's next, I've created a video right here that expands on how to apply these principles specifically in high-pressure professional environments. Click through if you're ready to take these concepts into practical application where the stakes are highest. Until next time, remember, in a world of emotional chaos, the one who maintains clarity isn't just surviving, they're thriving. I'll see you in the next exploration.